No one wanted the alien woman because of her scars on her face, but the most handsome person chose her. The transport vessel shuddered as it locked into Threshold Station's docking clamp, and Kale felt her stomach perform one final rebellious flip before the artificial gravity stabilized. 3 weeks in a refugee hauler with failing inertial dampeners had left her intimately acquainted with every shade of nausea the human, or near-human, body could experience. She'd actually started rating them. The lime green variety that hit during the third hyperspace jump had been particularly memorable. All passengers proceed to immigration processing, Zone 7, droned the automated voice, managing to sound bored in 6 languages simultaneously. Impressive, really. Kale had never heard Croylian sound quite so lifeless. She pulled her hood lower, the rough fabric scratching against the tips of her ears, and joined the shuffling crowd flowing toward the exit. Around her, beings of a dozen species clutched salvaged belongings and wore identical expressions of exhausted hope. Threshold Station was what you reached when you'd run out of better options. It was the universe's waiting room, and nobody was here for the complimentary refreshments. The docking tunnel smelled of recycled air with an undertone of desperation and discount disinfectant. Someone had apparently decided Spring Meadow was an appropriate scent for a space station. Kale wondered if they'd ever actually seen a meadow. This smelled more like what you'd get if spring had died, been recycled through a chemical processor, and given up on life. Immigration processing was a symphony of controlled chaos. Holographic signs flickered directions in languages Kale couldn't read, children wailed, and somewhere someone was arguing loudly with a customs droid about the legal definition of livestock. She took her place in line behind a Torellian family, their crystalline skin refracting the harsh overhead lights into small rainbows. Beautiful. The youngest child stared at her with the disconcerting directness only children could manage. Kale kept her face angled away. The line crawled forward with the urgency of geological time. Kale occupied herself by mentally cataloging the station's visible infrastructure. Third-generation stellar dock, probably 40 years old, with patches from at least 5 different refit cycles. The environmental systems were working overtime. She could hear the wheeze in the ventilation, and the lighting had that particular flicker that meant someone was skimping on power distribution maintenance. Next, called the customs officer, a human woman whose expression suggested she'd processed approximately 10,000 souls too many. Kale approached the counter, already reaching for her identification chip. The officer's scanner hummed, projecting her details into the air between them. Name, species classification, last known address, all the fragments that supposedly added up to a person. Purpose of visit to Threshold Station? Couldn't afford the next transport out, Kale said. The officer didn't smile. Tough crowd. Seeking employment and temporary residence. The scanner beeped. The officer's eyes flicked to Kale's face, then quickly away. The flinch was subtle, practiced. Kale had learned to measure them on a scale from 1 to 10. This was maybe a 4. Almost professional. Duration of stay? However long it takes to remember why I thought this was better than the outer rim. The officer's fingers paused over her data pad. Still no smile. Kale was losing her touch. Indefinite, she clarified. A few more questions, a retinal scan that made her eyes water, and a stamp that probably meant something official. The officer pushed a data chip across the counter without quite making eye contact. Temporary resident permit. Valid for 90 standard days. Renew at any station administrative office. Next. Dismissed. Kale pocketed the chip and moved into the main concourse, where Threshold Station opened up like a wound in space, vast and teeming and slightly infected. The ceiling curved away overhead, simulating a sky that had never existed, complete with clouds that followed pre-programmed patterns. Shops lined every available surface, their signs screaming in neon desperation. Above it all, a massive view screen displayed arrivals, departures, and advertisements for things nobody needed but everyone supposedly wanted. She needed to find the employment kiosks. Also food. Her stomach reminded her that shipboard rations barely qualified as edible, and that was being generous to the concept of food. The crowd flowed around her like water around a stone. Thousands of beings going everywhere and nowhere, each wrapped in their own small universes of concern. Nobody looked twice at her, not with her hood up, her shoulders hunched, her entire posture designed to suggest she wasn't worth noticing. She'd gotten good at being invisible. It was a skill she'd developed over the 2 years since the separation wars ended, since the day she'd walked out of the field hospital and realized the peace she'd fought for had no particular use for scarred medics with nightmares and steady hands. A merchant called out from a stall selling what appeared to be either exotic fruit or decorative electronics. Honestly, with some species, it was hard to tell. Kale shook her head and kept walking. Her credits would last maybe 2 weeks if she was careful and ate nothing but nutrition paste. 3 weeks if she was willing to really suffer. The employment kiosk stood in a corner of the concourse, surrounded by beings whose desperation was slightly more focused than the general ambient variety. Kale joined another line, this one moving even slower. She pulled out her data chip, reviewing her resident permit while trying not to think about what came after 90 days if she hadn't found something sustainable. The being in front of her, some species with too many joints in unfortunate places, was arguing with the kiosk interface about their qualifications. Something about molecular gastronomy certification not being recognized by station standards. The kiosk's AI voice was achieving new heights of bureaucratic indifference. Kale's turn came eventually. She pressed her chip to the reader and began scrolling through available positions. Most required credentials she didn't have or species-specific biology she didn't possess. A few were probably legal. She lingered on a maintenance position in the lower engineering levels. Waste Recycling Systems Management. The pay was terrible, the hours were worse, and it was exactly the kind of job nobody looked at twice. Perfect. She submitted her application, noting her medical and technical background without mentioning which particular war had provided that experience. The system processed for a moment, then beeped acceptance. Report to Level 19, Subsection D, shift start in 4 hours. 4 hours to find somewhere to sleep and something to eat. Kale felt her ears twitch beneath the hood, a gesture she'd never quite learned to suppress when things were looking up, relatively speaking. She headed toward the residential levels, following signs that promised affordable temporary housing in the same tone that promised spring meadows. But affordable was affordable, and temporary was her entire life now anyway. Level 19 smelled like everything the universe had decided to throw away, processed through machines that had given up caring sometime around the last decade. Kale had reported for her shift and been handed a maintenance jumpsuit that was approximately the right size if she didn't breathe too deeply, a tool belt that had seen better centuries, and a brief nod from the shift supervisor who seemed relieved she'd actually shown up. Most people take one look at the recycling processors and find urgent business elsewhere, said Ven, the 4-armed Caridian who'd been assigned to show her the basics. He was missing his lower left arm, the stub sealed with old scar tissue and what looked like part of a cargo clamp welded directly to the bone. You don't seem the squeamish type. I've seen worse, Kale said, studying the massive cylindrical machines that hummed and churned with the station's waste. Though I'll admit, I've rarely smelled worse. Ven's laugh was like gravel in a mixer. Yeah, the olfactory filters gave out on Processor 3 about 2 years ago. We keep submitting repair requests. Station admin keeps filing them under when we get around to it, which is administrative code for never. So we're breathing recycled garbage? We're breathing efficiently processed recycled garbage. There's a difference. Ven tapped a monitor showing flow rates and contamination levels. The system works, mostly. We just have to manually override the sorting protocols every few hours because the AI that runs this section developed what the techs call a personality quirk. As if summoned, a synthesized voice echoed from the processor speakers. I am detecting emotional distress in my operation. Have you considered that I have feelings about processing organic waste? Kale blinked. The recycling system is having an existential crisis? Every Tuesday, said a voice behind her. She turned to find a human kid, maybe 17, with hair shaved on one side and dyed in colors that definitely violated several station regulations. Also Thursdays. And sometimes Saturdays if they've been feeding the diplomatic-level synthetic champagne through the system. I'm Rico. Kale. She didn't offer a hand. The hood was still up, and she intended to keep it that way as long as possible. The system's not really sentient, Rico continued, pulling up a diagnostic panel. Some programmer thought it would be funny to install a personality subroutine. Now we get philosophical commentary about the nature of waste and existence. Last week it asked me if garbage was truly garbage, if it could be transformed into something useful, or if it was simply matter awaiting its next purpose. What did you tell it? That it was getting paid to process shit, not contemplate it, and maybe it should focus on doing its job. Rico grinned. It sulked for 3 hours and reduced processing efficiency by 15%. I am not sulking, the system announced. I am operating at reduced capacity to protest the existential weight of my duties. Ven sighed, manipulating controls with 3 hands while using the 4th to gesture in exasperation. See what we deal with. Now stop whining and process the organic waste from Section 12 before it backs up into the residential levels. Again. The system made a noise that might have been electronic grumbling, but the flow rates adjusted. Kale found herself smiling despite everything. There was something almost restful about being in a place where the biggest drama was a neurotic recycling system and the worst smell in the known galaxy. Nobody here cared what she looked like. They cared whether she could read a diagnostic panel and keep the station's intestines flowing smoothly. The shift settled into a rhythm. Monitor the flow rates, adjust the sorting protocols, manually override when the system decided to wax philosophical about the temporary nature of all matter. During breaks, the 3 of them sat in what Rico optimistically called the break room, a corner with salvaged chairs and a beverage dispenser that produced something claiming to be coffee. So, what's your story? Rico asked, boots propped up on a crate labeled, hazardous, do not open. Outer Rim refugee. Something like that. Kale kept her face angled away, sipping the alleged coffee. It tasted like the recycling system smelled, which seemed appropriate. You. Corporate indenture dodge. My parents signed a contract with Helion Industries before I was born. Turns out you can inherit debt and mandatory service in 17 systems. So I inherited the good sense to run. Rico's grin was sharp. Been here 8 months. They stopped looking after 6. Corporations don't waste resources on one missing worker when they can just indenture someone else. Ven stretched his arms, joints popping in sequence. Industrial accident, 20 years back. Lost the arm, lost the job, lost the pension. Threshold doesn't ask questions if you can work, so here I am, keeping the garbage flowing and the existential dread at bay. We're a cheerful bunch, Kale observed. The very cheeriest, Rico agreed. Nothing says optimism like waste management in the armpit of space. The shift computer chimed. Ven checked it and groaned. Processor 5 has a blockage. Something's jamming the organic separator. I'll get it, Kale said, standing. Where's the access panel? Ven directed her to a maintenance corridor that was somehow even less appealing than the main processor room. The access panel required manual opening. Of course it did. And inside, the separator drums were clogged with something that had definitely been food once but had achieved a higher state of decomposition. She pulled on elbow-length gloves and got to work, clearing the blockage piece by piece while the processor hummed its appreciation. Or possibly its judgment. Hard to tell. You're good at this, Ven said when she emerged, covered in substances better left unidentified. Field medic, separation wars. You learn to work with whatever's in front of you, no matter how messy. Something shifted in Ven's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Medic. That explains the steady hands. He paused. Which side? The losing one. Though honestly, I'm not sure anyone won that war. Never do, Ven said quietly. The shift ended eventually, as even the worst shifts must. Kale returned to her quarters, a space barely large enough to be called a room, with a bunk that folded from the wall and a sonic shower that worked intermittently. She stripped off the jumpsuit and stood under water that was at least warm, watching the grime of the day spiral down the drain. Her reflection appeared in the small mirror, steam clearing to reveal the familiar landscape of scar tissue that covered the left side of her face and neck. The burns had healed years ago, but the skin remained a testament to the bulkhead explosion that had nearly killed her while she was pulling soldiers from a damaged ship. 3 lives saved. 1 face marked permanently. She traced the deepest scar, the one that ran from her temple to her jaw, bisecting her cheek. The doctors had done what they could, but field medicine on a colony world had its limitations. They'd saved her life. They'd saved her ear. The rest was cosmetic, they'd said, as if that made it matter less. Kale pulled on sleep clothes and collapsed onto the bunk. Somewhere above her, the wealthy and beautiful were dining in restaurants with real gravity and natural light. Down here, in the station's forgotten levels, she was just another worker keeping the systems running. And for now, that was enough. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the processors lull her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring another shift, more philosophical commentary from a neurotic AI, and the comfortable anonymity of being exactly where no one was looking. The ventilation malfunction started as a minor fluctuation in Processor 7's atmospheric readings and escalated into a full diplomatic incident in under 20 minutes. Kale was elbow-deep in a filtration array when the alarm sounded, followed immediately by Ven's voice crackling over her comm. "We've got a problem. Upper levels. Environmental cascade in the diplomatic wing." "Since when is that our problem?" Kale asked, extracting herself from the machinery. "Since the malfunction originated from a cross-link system down here and station admin just declared all available maintenance personnel emergency conscripted. They're using words like immediate and critical, and your employment depends on this." Kale grabbed her toolkit and headed for the lift. Rico was already there, looking unusually nervous. "I've never been above level 10, the kid admitted. "Do they really have carpeting up there?" "Focus on the job, not the decor." Kale stepped into the lift, and they shot upward through the station's layers like rising through social strata. The difference was visible in real time: cleaner walls, better lighting, fewer suspicious stains. Level 3 was another universe entirely. The corridor actually had art on the walls. Real art, not just safety placards and graffiti. The carpet was a deep blue that had probably never met the underside of a maintenance boot. And the air smelled like something other than recycled desperation. A frantic station coordinator met them, his uniform actually pressed. "The Tyrellian delegation is hosting a reception for the Confederation ambassador. They have children with them." The atmospheric recycling system started pumping concentrated pollen analogs from the hydroponics bay directly into the diplomatic suite 10 minutes ago. Pollen analogs? Rico looked confused. Modified plant proteins for the decorative gardens. Harmless to most species. Apparently lethal to young Tyrellians. The coordinator was already moving, leading them down the corridor at a near run. The filtration should have caught it, but something in the lower system cross-linked. "The philosophical recycling AI," Kale and Rico said simultaneously. The coordinator stared at them. "What? Long story. Where's the environmental access?" They rounded a corner into chaos. Beings in formal attire clustered outside the diplomatic suite, some coughing, others shouting into communicators. Through the open doorway, Kale could see a child on the floor, crystalline skin flickering erratically, parents bent over them in obvious panic. Her medic training overrode every instinct to remain invisible. She was moving before she'd consciously decided, pushing through the crowd, toolkit forgotten. The child was maybe 6 years old in human equivalent, their breathing rapid and shallow, skin showing stress fractures that wept luminescent fluid. "Anaphylactic reaction," Kale said, dropping beside them. Her hood fell back as she moved. She didn't notice. "Someone get me an emergency medical kit. Now." A security officer thrust one at her. Kale's hands moved on autopilot, checking vitals, assessing respiratory function. The Tyrellian physiology was different, but not incomprehensibly so. She'd treated 3 of them during the war after a joint operation went sideways. The key was the crystalline structure. It could fracture under stress, causing systemic cascade. "I need to stabilize the dermal matrix," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her fingers found the antihistamine injector, checked the species compatibility chart on the kit's display. Close enough. She adjusted the dosage, administered it at the base of the child's neck where the crystal structure was thinnest. "You're hurting them," the mother cried. "I'm keeping them alive," Kale corrected, not looking up. The pollen triggered a systemic reaction. "Their skin is fracturing. If we don't stabilize it now, the cascade will reach the internal organs." She worked quickly, pulling equipment from the medical kit with practiced efficiency. A dermal stabilizer, an oxygen supplement calibrated for Tyrellian respiration, a mineral solution to reinforce the crystalline matrix. The child's breathing began to slow, the frantic flickering of their skin gradually steadying. There. Cale sat back, monitoring the readings. They'll need proper medical attention, but the immediate crisis is past. Keep them calm, maintain atmospheric humidity above 60%, and get them to the medical bay within the hour. She looked up then and realized everyone was staring at her. Not at her hands or her competence. At her face. The scars were fully visible in the diplomatic suite's perfect lighting, every mark and ridge impossible to miss. The crowd's reactions rippled through the space like a wave. Shock registered on multiple faces, followed by that particular expression Cale had learned to catalog, discomfort mixed with pity, curiosity fighting with revulsion. A few people turned away. One woman actually gasped. "Thank you," the Tyrellian father said, his voice breaking. "You saved Sela's life. Just doing what needed doing." Cale reached for her hood, but the coordinator was already pulling her to her feet, talking rapidly into his communicator about heroic actions and proper recognition. The crowd pressed closer, and suddenly she couldn't breathe. The attention felt like weight, like pressure, like being back in the field hospital with too many wounded and not enough hands. "I should fix the ventilation," she managed, trying to extract herself. Already handled, Rico called from somewhere near the ceiling, where the kid was apparently doing impossible things with an access panel. The system was trying to create a natural garden experience. "I've explained that nearly killing children isn't natural or an experience anyone wants. The station administrator wants to speak with you," the coordinator said to Cale. "The Tyrellian ambassador insists on thanking you formally." "That's really not necessary. I must disagree." The ambassador himself appeared, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of his species. He was tall, his crystalline skin refracting the light into subtle rainbows, his formal robe suggesting important things about status and position that Cale didn't care about. "You saved my daughter's life with remarkable skill and no hesitation. I am deeply in your debt." "It was just medical training," Cale said, desperately looking for an exit. "Anyone with field experience would have done the same." "But it was you who acted." The ambassador's eyes, multifaceted and impossible to read, fixed on her face. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "I would like to offer proper thanks. The Unity Gala is in 3 days. I would be honored if you would attend as my personal guest." Cale nearly laughed. The Unity Gala. The one where all the important people wear their best clothes and pretend the universe isn't held together with duct tape and hope. That is an accurate if somewhat cynical summary, yes. "I work in waste management. And I work in diplomacy. Both necessary, both occasionally unpleasant." The ambassador smiled. "Please. It would mean much to my family. To me. Station protocol requires I extend official gratitude. I would prefer to do so genuinely." Every instinct screamed at Cale to refuse, to disappear back into the lower levels where she belonged. But something else stirred beneath the panic, a small, stubborn spark of defiance. Why should she hide? The scars were proof she'd survived. Proof she'd saved lives. Proof she was still here when so many others weren't. "Fine," she heard herself say. "But I'm not promising I'll stay longer than the free food requires." The ambassador's smile widened. "That is all I ask." Cale retrieved her hood and her toolkit and followed Rico back to the lift, aware of eyes tracking her every step. As the doors closed and they descended back toward level 19, the kid finally spoke. "So, that happened." "That happened," Cale agreed. "You're going to a fancy party." "Apparently. In 3 days." "Yes." Rico grinned. "This is either going to be amazing or a complete disaster." "Probably both," Cale said, and tried not to think about the weight of all those stares, the whispers that had followed her exit, or the fact that she just agreed to put herself on display in front of the most powerful beings on the station. The lift shuddered as it reached level 19, and the familiar smell of the recycling processors washed over them. Cale had never been so relieved to smell garbage in her life. The Unity Gala was exactly 72 hours away, And Kale had precisely 0 items of appropriate clothing, negative experience with high society, and a rapidly growing sense that she'd made a terrible mistake. She expressed this to Ven during their shift while manually recalibrating a methane separator. "You saved a kid's life and got invited to a party. I'm failing to see the crisis," Ven said, using 2 hands to hold a panel while the other 2 worked the internals. "The crisis is that I'll be in a room full of people who look at me like I'm a waste management problem that wandered into the wrong level." "So you'll fit right in. You work in waste management." "That's not helping." The recycling system chose that moment to chime in. "I sense anxiety in your biological markers. Have you considered that social gatherings are simply another form of processing? Raw social matter enters, interactions occur, and transformed relationships emerge. You are already skilled at processing difficult material." "Did the garbage system just give me a pep talk?" Kale asked. "I prefer to think of it as philosophical guidance," the AI replied. Rico appeared from behind Processor 3, covered in something viscous and probably toxic. "Okay, I've been thinking about your wardrobe situation. We need to get creative." "I'm not wearing garbage." "I wasn't going to suggest that. I was going to suggest we raid the station's lost and found. People abandon stuff in the upper levels all the time. Rich people stuff. Fancy stuff." Rico's eyes gleamed with the particular excitement of someone about to commit light theft for a good cause. "That's stealing. It's reclamation. We work in recycling. It's basically our job." Ven made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The kid has a point. Plus, I know someone in station services who owes me a favor. Could probably get you access to the formal wear storage. Diplomatic events always have emergency backup outfits for visiting dignitaries who spill things on themselves." "Why does station services store formal wear?" "Because 3 cycles ago, a Valerian ambassador got into a territorial dispute with a buffet table. Lost badly. Station learned to keep backup options." Ven sealed the panel he'd been working on. "Look, you're going to this thing whether you're prepared or not. Might as well show up looking like you belong there, even if we all know the whole system is held together with inadequate funding and misplaced optimism." Which was how Kale found herself in a storage room on level 8 that evening, after her shift ended and before she could reconsider every life choice that had led to this moment. Ven's contact, a maintenance supervisor named Torres who apparently collected favors like some people collected rare minerals, had given them 20 minutes and strict instructions not to damage anything or let anyone know where they'd gotten access. "This is insane," Kale said, staring at racks of clothing that probably cost more than she'd earned in the last year. "This is survival," Rico corrected, already pulling items from hangers with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. "You can't show up in your maintenance jumpsuit." "Well, you could, but the statement you'd be making is probably not the one you want." "What statement do I want to make?" "That you belong there. That you're not ashamed. That your scars are just part of who you are, not the only thing about you." Rico held up a formal jacket in deep blue. "Try this." An hour later, after multiple attempts and Rico's surprisingly sophisticated understanding of formal wear, Kale stood in front of a mirror wearing an outfit that somehow worked. The jacket was tailored but not restrictive, the pants were formal enough for the occasion without making her feel like she was playing dress-up, and the whole ensemble was in dark colors that didn't draw unnecessary attention. Rico had even found a shirt with a collar that sat properly given her longer ears. "You clean up okay," Rico said, clearly pleased with the results. "I look like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." "You look like someone who survived a war and saved a kid's life and deserves to eat expensive food on someone else's credit." Rico adjusted the jacket's shoulders. "The scars are still visible. We're not hiding them. We're just making sure when people look at you, they see the whole person, not just the parts that make them uncomfortable." Kale studied her reflection. The scars were there, undeniable in the harsh lighting. The left side of her face bore the marks of fire and explosion, tissue that had healed but never forgotten. Her ear rose to a point, slightly longer than human standard, a reminder of her species' differences. But Rico was right, the clothing created a context. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone with a history. "I still think this is a terrible idea," she said. Probably, Rico agreed cheerfully. But at least you'll look good while it falls apart. The next 2 days passed in a blur of shifts and increasing anxiety. The recycling system offered regular philosophical commentary about the nature of transformation and social metamorphosis. Ven provided practical advice about which utensils to use and how to navigate conversations with people whose problems were fundamentally different from normal human concerns. Rico coached her on small talk, which apparently consisted of saying bland things about the weather, the station, and current events while carefully avoiding any topics of actual substance. Rich people's small talk is just verbal processing, Rico explained during a break. Input meaningless pleasantries, output equally meaningless responses, maintain the social flow. It's not that different from what we do here, except the garbage is conversational. That's deeply cynical. That's deeply accurate. The night of the gala arrived with the inevitability of a waste management schedule. Kale changed in her quarters, her hands steadier than she'd expected. The outfit fit perfectly. Rico had even procured shoes that were formal but comfortable, clearly understanding that Kale would flee at the first sign of foot pain. She stood before the mirror one final time, taking in the full effect. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, confident, composed, dressed like she belonged in spaces Kale had spent 2 years avoiding. But the scars were still there, and her ears still rose to delicate points, and her eyes still held the weight of everything she'd seen and done. "You're more than your past," she told her reflection, testing the words. They felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd heard but never spoken. The lift ride to level 3 felt shorter than it should have. The doors opened onto a transformed corridor. The diplomatic wing had been decorated for the occasion, with light installations that mimicked stars and carefully cultivated plants that probably required more maintenance than the entire lower-level waste system. Music drifted from the main ballroom, something classical and ethereal that definitely hadn't been composed by anything familiar with recycling processors. Beings in formal attire moved through the space with practiced ease, their conversations a low hum of important things being discussed or carefully avoided. Kale watched them from the corridor, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her shoulders. She could still leave. Turn around, descend back to level 19, pretend this had never happened. Return to the comfortable obscurity of waste management and philosophical AI commentary. Instead, she took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked forward into the light and noise and inevitable judgment of the Unity Gala, her long ears catching fragments of conversations about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols and matters of galactic importance that had nothing to do with the price of survival. The ballroom doors stood open before her, and through them she could see the glittering assembly of the Confederation's finest. Somewhere in that crowd was the ambassador who'd invited her. Somewhere in that space was whatever came next. Kale stepped through the doors, and every careful plan to remain invisible evaporated as heads began to turn. The ballroom was designed to overwhelm. Ceiling panels displayed a simulated view of the galaxy, stars wheeling in their ancient patterns while below, the Confederation's elite mingled beneath the light of distant suns they'd probably never visit. Kale spotted at least 15 species she recognized, and a dozen she didn't, all dressed in their finest interpretations of formal wear. The air smelled like expensive perfume and political ambition. She made it approximately 10 steps before the staring began in earnest. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked her movement across the polished floor. The whispers started as a ripple and spread like a system's malfunction through social circuits. Kale kept her chin level and aimed for the refreshment table, figuring if she was going to be gawked at, she might as well have food in her hand. The spread was obscene, delicacies from 24 worlds arranged with artistic precision. She recognized maybe a quarter of it. The rest could have been food or decorative sculpture. With some species cuisine, the line was admirably thin. "The crystalline things are Altuiron sugar formations," said a voice beside her. "Technically edible. Practically lethal if you value your teeth." Kale glanced over at a Draxian merchant, his scales gleaming with what was probably very expensive oil. He was looking at her scars with the clinical interest of someone pricing damaged goods. "Thanks for the warning," she said, selecting something that looked reasonably safe. "You're the one who saved the Torellian child." It wasn't a question. News had apparently traveled. Impressive response time. The medical corps could use people with that kind of instinct. The medical corps didn't want people with my face. The merchant had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, well. Unfortunate reality of public-facing positions. Image matters in ways competence often doesn't. He moved away before she could decide whether to be offended or just tired. Kale made a project of the buffet, constructing a plate that represented at least 8 different biospheres and probably violated several food combination safety protocols. She was examining what might have been either a very small pastry or a very large insect when she felt the shift in the room's energy, a collective intake of breath, a turning of bodies toward the entrance. Commander Alexei Durant had arrived, and the universe apparently felt obligated to acknowledge it. Kale had seen propaganda footage during the war. Everyone had. The Confederation's golden boy, the decorated hero who'd turned the tide at the Battle of Kepler Station, the face they'd plastered on recruitment posters across 3 sectors. The footage hadn't been exaggerated. If anything, it had been conservative. He moved through the crowd like gravity itself was negotiable, his formal uniform tailored to suggest both authority and approachability, his smile carrying enough wattage to power a small station. Genetically blessed or cosmetically enhanced, she muttered to herself, taking a bite of something that turned out to be delicious and possibly sentient. Both, probably, said someone nearby. She turned to find an older human woman in diplomatic robes, watching Durant's progress with amusement. 3 generations of selective genetic optimization, plus whatever surgical assistance his family could afford. The result is what you see, a man designed to be looked at. Sounds exhausting. For him or for us? The woman smiled. I'm Ambassador Chen, Terran Sector. You must be Kale, the mysterious medic who saved young Sela. The ambassador has been asking after you. I'm not mysterious. I just work on a level most people don't visit. Which makes you mysterious by upper-level standards. Down here, if you're not immediately visible, you're exotic. Chen plucked a drink from a passing server's tray. Fair warning, the ambassador intends to thank you publicly. Probably during the formal remarks. Try to look gracious and not like you'd rather be anywhere else. I would rather be anywhere else. Then you'll fit in perfectly. Half this room is wondering if the canapés are worth the tedium, and the other half is calculating political advantage per conversation. It's all very civilized and completely exhausting. Chen raised her glass in a small salute and drifted toward a cluster of officials who looked like they were discussing something either very important or very boring. Kale retreated to a corner near the observation windows, where she could watch the crowd without being immediately in it. The view beyond the windows showed threshold stations' docking arms extending into space like metallic fingers, ships coming and going in their endless dance of commerce and transit. Out there, people were living actual lives. In here, they were performing elaborate social theater. She was mentally drafting her exit strategy when the Turellian ambassador found her, his daughter Sela at his side. The child's crystalline skin had returned to its normal luminescence, showing no signs of the near catastrophe from days before. Miss Kale, the ambassador said warmly. I'm so pleased you came. Sela wanted to thank you herself. The child stepped forward, her movements careful and precise. You saved my life. My parents say I should give you this. She held out a small crystalline sculpture, no larger than Kale's thumb, shaped like a flower that caught and refracted light into tiny rainbows. It's from our home. It means gratitude and respect. Kale knelt, bringing herself to the child's eye level. That's beautiful. Thank you. She accepted the sculpture, feeling its cool weight in her palm. How are you feeling? Much better. The doctor said I have to avoid pollen analogues forever now. I'm disappointed because the gardens are very pretty. Sela tilted her head, studying Kale's face with the directness only children possessed. Your scars look like rivers. We have rivers on my world that flow across crystal fields. They make beautiful patterns. Something in Kale's chest tightened. That's a lovely way to think of them. Sela, let's give Miss Kale some space, the ambassador said gently, guiding his daughter toward a group of other diplomatic children. He paused, meeting Kale's eyes. Thank you. Not just for saving her, but for coming tonight. I know this isn't comfortable for you. It's definitely not comfortable, Kale admitted. But your daughter is worth it. She stayed in her corner, nursing a drink that tasted like starlight and cost more than her monthly rent. The crowd ebbed and flowed around her, conversations rising and falling like tides. Occasionally someone would glance her way, their curiosity obvious, but most seemed content to observe from a distance. Then Commander Durant turned and looked directly at her across the crowded room. Cale froze. She couldn't have explained why. She'd faced worse than a decorated officer's attention. But something in the way he paused, the way his expression shifted from diplomatic pleasantness to something more focused, made her want to check her exits. He was moving toward her. Not quickly, not obviously, but with clear intention. People tried to intercept him. A general wanting discussion, a civilian official with urgent concerns. But he deflected them with practiced ease, his trajectory unwavering. Cale seriously considered the structural integrity of the observation windows and whether they could be opened in an emergency. He reached her corner before she could finalize her escape plan. Up close, he was somehow worse, not in appearance, which remained unfairly perfect, but in presence. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to question whether they belonged somewhere. "You're Cale," he said. Not a question. His voice was exactly what she'd expected, warm, clear, probably trained for maximum auditory appeal. "And you're Commander Durant. I've seen the posters." His smile flickered with what might have been genuine amusement. "The posters are deeply embarrassing. I keep requesting they use someone else's face, but apparently I'm recognizable and inspiring to potential recruits." He glanced at the buffet table. "Have you tried the Altaïran sugar formations? I'm told they're lethal to dental work. Someone already warned me off them." "Smart. I learned that lesson the expensive way." He was still looking at her, his gaze steady and direct. Not staring at her scars, but not pointedly avoiding them either. Just looking at her like she was a person worth paying attention to. "I heard about what you did for the ambassador's daughter." Quick thinking. The medical report was impressive. Cale studied him, looking for the angle. There was always an angle. Reports get filed even on the lower levels. "I was on level 19 2 weeks ago. Routine inspection of the maintenance systems. I saw you working on one of the processors. You were explaining to your coworkers why the AI's existential crisis was actually a routing problem in the philosophical subroutine, and if someone just removed the meaning of waste module, it would stop complaining and do its job." His smile widened slightly. "You were funny. Competent. The kind of person who makes things work despite the systems being designed by people who've never actually had to use them." She blinked. "You were on level 19. Station commanders are supposed to know all the levels, not just the pretty ones. Though I'll admit the recycling section isn't my preferred environment. The smell is memorable." He paused. "When I heard about the Torellian emergency, I looked into who'd responded. Recognized the name from the maintenance roster. Then I heard the ambassador invited you tonight, and I thought I'd come introduce myself properly instead of as the guy who signs off on inadequate maintenance budgets." "So this is guilt about funding?" "This is recognition that the people keeping this station functional get ignored while people like me get paraded around as examples of excellence." It seemed worth acknowledging. He gestured toward the crowd. "Everyone here is performing. Diplomats performing politics, officers performing confidence, merchants performing success. It's exhausting. Then I see someone who saved a child's life and looks like they'd rather be literally anywhere else, and I think, there's someone real." Cale felt something shift in her chest, like a defensive panel sliding aside. "I work in waste management. I'm not exactly inspirational poster material." "Neither am I. They just photograph better than they should." Durant's expression changed, some of the polish falling away. "Do you know what it's like to have your face used as propaganda? To have every action measured against an impossible standard? To know people don't see you, they see the marketing version, the heroic narrative, the symbol they need you to be." "No," Cale said honestly. "People see my scars and decide they know everything about me. Different problem, same result. We're both walking narratives written by other people's expectations." "Exactly." He looked at her like she'd said something profound instead of just obvious. So maybe we could stop performing for a minute. Dance with me. Kale nearly laughed. You want to dance with the scarred maintenance worker. That's your play. I want to dance with the person who understands what it's like to be reduced to surface details. He offered his hand, palm up, no pressure. Also, I've been dodging the Valerian trade delegate for 20 minutes, and she's persistent. Dancing with someone gives me a socially acceptable excuse to keep moving. Using me as a diplomatic shield. How flattering. I'm being honest about my motivations. Seemed only fair, given you've been honest about wanting to leave since you arrived. She looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for deception or pity or any of the usual markers she'd learned to identify. She found only tired amusement and what looked like genuine interest. Around them, the crowd was watching. Conversations had paused again. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Fine, Kale said, taking his hand. But if this turns into some kind of publicity moment, I'm returning to level 19 and telling the recycling system to develop new personality disorders. Deal. He led her to the dance floor with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times at 1,000 similar events. The music shifted to something slower, more intimate. His hand settled at her waist, hers on his shoulder, and they began to move. You're good at this, she observed. Military Academy. They teach you to fight, lead, and waltz. The triumvirate of useful command skills. His tone was dry. You're not bad yourself. Field hospitals had downtime. Someone always knew how to dance. It was that or go insane from the waiting. She felt the weight of eyes on them, the crowd's attention pressing in from all sides. Everyone's staring. Let them. They were going to stare anyway. At least this way we're moving targets. Despite herself, Kale smiled. The dance continued, and gradually the pressure of attention faded into background noise. Durant asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in her stories about philosophical AIs and maintenance emergencies. She found herself asking about his service, learning that beneath the propaganda was someone who'd seen combat, lost people, carried weight that had nothing to do with photogenic heroism. Why did you really approach me? She asked finally. The truth, not the diplomatic answer. He was quiet for a moment, their movement continuing through the pause. Because I watched you save that child without hesitation. Because you did it despite knowing people would see your face and judge you. Because you came tonight even though it terrified you, and you're still here even though every instinct probably tells you to run. That's not performance. That's courage. And I've met enough performers to recognize the real thing when I see it. Kale felt something crack in her carefully maintained defenses. The scars don't bother you. The scars are proof you survived something terrible and kept going. Why would that bother me? He met her eyes directly. You're more than your past. You're more than what happened to your face. You're the person who saves children and fixes broken systems and makes sarcastic comments about the meaning of garbage. That's who I see. The words settled into spaces Kale hadn't known were empty. She'd spent 2 years believing her scars defined her because that's what everyone's reactions had taught her. But Durant looked at her like she was complete, not damaged. Like her history was part of her story, not the entire narrative. Why do you look at me like that? She asked, her voice quieter than she'd intended. Because you're beautiful, he said simply. Your scars are part of you, but they don't define you. You're more than your past. The music swelled around them. The ballroom, which had felt like a cage, suddenly seemed less oppressive. Kale realized she'd stopped thinking about exits and started thinking about possibilities. This is probably going to cause all kinds of speculation, she said. Definitely. The gossip will be spectacular. I'll probably get messages from concerned superiors about appropriate conduct. You'll probably have people trying to figure out your angle. He smiled. Worth it. Kale thought about Ven and Rico waiting to hear how the night went. About the recycling system that would probably have philosophical insights about transformation. About the child who'd compared her scars to rivers across crystal fields. About the fact that she'd walked into this ballroom expecting judgment and found something else entirely. Yeah, she said. Worth it. The dance ended, but Durant didn't let go of her hand immediately. Around them, the crowd had fallen into an unusual silence, watching two people who'd somehow become more than their prescribed narratives. Kale looked at the commander, at Alexei, and felt something like hope stirring beneath her carefully maintained cynicism. The universe was still held together with inadequate funding and desperate improvisation. The lower levels still smelled like recycled despair. Her face still bore the marks of fire and loss. But someone had chosen her. Not despite the scars, but with full recognition of everything they represented. And maybe that was enough to believe that she was, in fact, more than her past. The music started again, and they kept dancing. The end.